Started off by talking about the Tanakh, the written law. And we said there are 24 books of the Tanakh, which are books which were given to us by prophecy through prophets, the greatest prophet being Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses, our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu. And the first 5 books of Moses are from him, obviously, they're called the books of Moses. The other books were from various prophets, and the truth is we said there are millions of prophets, because all the Jews at Har Sinai had revelation. They saw God, they heard the commandments from God directly, which means that they were prophets. There are millions of prophets at one time. And there were schools of prophets. Each of the great prophets, we find they're called the Bnei Nevi'im, the sons of the prophets. So they say the prophet Elijah had students. One of them was his famous student Elisha, who took over when Elijah died. Or actually he never died, he was beamed up alive. He went straight up. And there were thousands and thousands of prophets at that time, if not millions. And these prophecies were all written down. However, not all of them were included in the Tanakh. The Tanakh has very few prophecies. Only the prophecies, the Talmud says, which were needed for future generations were written down. Prophecies which were not needed for future generations were not written down. So the prophecies we have, the famous prophets which we have in the Tanakh, in the Bible, are the prophecies which were needed for future generations. So obviously, if we have them today, they have some reference to our time. When one look into our time and in our day, what's going on, you'll find prophecies relating to them in the prophets which we have written down. And not only does the Tanakh consist of books of prophecies, but it also consists of books of writings, which are nothing to do with prophecies. Were written with the Holy Spirit. It's called the Holy Spirit, Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. Book of Psalms, not prophecies, but kinds of prayers written with the Holy Spirit. Proverbs, wisdom, books of wisdom, which we're going to discuss today when we talk about Midrash. Proverbs was written by King Solomon, who was the wisest of the wise. And when he wrote things, he wrote them in parable form, just like Aesop's fables. There's a little simple story, and there's a deep message behind the simple story. So that's the book of Proverbs. It's a simple thing, simple statements, but very, very deep statements behind them, very deep ideas behind them. Book of Job. According to the Talmud, there's 3 opinions. Did he exist? When did he exist? And the third opinion is he never existed at all. It's a book of philosophy about reward and punishment. Why do the righteous suffer? Book of Job. We have the books of Song of Songs, which is an erotic love story, but the Talmud says, and they had a big debate, shall they include it in Tanakh or not include it in Tanakh? Rabbi Akiva says all the books of the Torah are holy. The Song of Songs is the holy of holies. Why? It's a love story between man and God. It shouldn't be taken at face value. So again, it's King Solomon's writing. King Solomon wrote in a very deep form. It's a parable form. If you look at the art scroll, Song of Songs, totally different from the real text, because they went according to the explanation of Rashi, and they explained all the parables. So they skip out the main text. If you look in Hebrew, look in English, you won't recognize it. The English is totally different based on the commentaries. Because if you really want to translate, it's so erotic, it's so wild. So they didn't even translate it properly. They didn't translate it literally. They translated it with the commentaries. So they explained it already. The book of Esther, story of Purim. So a bit of history and ethics. Eicha, the book of Lamentations. So all these are different books. Not of prophecy per se, but of written by Ruach HaKodesh, written with the Holy Spirit, but needed for our generation. We want to know how to pray. Read the book of Psalms. You want to know why bad things happen? Read the book of Job. Read the book of Eicha, Lamentations. See why bad things happen to us. Read the book of Megillah Esther. See why bad things are happening. And then last week we discussed the Mishnah. And we said that the Tanakh is the written law. And on the right of that we have the oral law. The Mishnah is the oral law. And we gave examples of written laws which are impossible to be understood without an oral code. Certain laws, if you look through the Torah and you see certain sections of the Torah seems to be very, very cryptic language, very, very short language. We said, we gave examples. You write these words on the doorpost of your home. You write them on the doorpost of your home. What do you write? How do you write? What do you write on? What do you write with? What color ink? Doesn't say. So you need the oral law to come along and explain. And the tradition is that Moses was on Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights. What was he doing over there? He was learning the oral law. And he was there twice. So he was learning the oral law twice over. To get it straight, he had to really go and learn it properly. So that's the Mishnah comes into play. Now the Mishnah is not just laws from Moses on Sinai. as known in Hebrew as Halacha la Moshe Sinai, which is authoritative and everyone has to follow the laws from Moses from Sinai. So there's written law from Moses from Sinai, and then there's the oral law from Moses from Sinai, which is equally binding. And they're both considered from the Torah. They're both considered laws from God. Then we have also in the oral law, in the Mishnah, laws which came later. For example, we have a whole tractate of Mishnah called Megillah, which is the laws of Purim. Obviously, Purim wasn't around at the time of Moses. Purim was about 1,000 years later. So the Mishnah discusses it. The Mishnah discusses in very brief form Hanukkah. It's a very short Mishnah which discusses Hanukkah. So it's interesting. So we find that the Mishnah does not just consist of laws from Moses from Sinai. It also consists of other laws which came later by the prophets and laws from the rabbis who followed. So the Mishnah is oral law, but it wasn't all from Moses. It was a sequence from different people. That's important to know. People make a distinction. People don't make a distinction. They just think everything's oral law. The truth is, nothing was allowed to be written down. Nothing apart from the 24 books of the Tanakh were allowed to be written down. In other words, if I was giving a class in those days, you wouldn't be allowed to take notes except for your own personal use and hide them afterwards. You wouldn't be allowed to write a book. I wouldn't be allowed to write a book. In those days, all teachings were kept oral except for these 24 books. And there's a prohibition of writing down these teachings. Similarly, there's a prohibition of saying orally written law. Because I want to quote to you a verse. There's a prohibition of quoting a verse without the text in front of you. Just in case the person might get the verse wrong. They'll misquote the verse. There's a prohibition of quoting something written without the written text, unless the person obviously knows it so well, they've repeated it many times, they're not going to make a mistake. And there's also a prohibition the other way, of writing something down which was oral. That was in those days. Till about 2,000 years ago, 100 CE, Rabbi Judah the Prince said, we better write it down. Otherwise, it was the time of the Roman persecution, and the Romans were persecuting the rabbis especially, and therefore there was a great issue that the Torah might be lost. The Torah may be forgotten. So therefore, they wrote down the Mishnah. That's when the Mishnah was written down, 100 CE, by Rabbi Judah the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. And the Mishnah we discussed last week consists of 6 parts. And then you have the Talmud, which is a commentary on the Mishnah, because the Mishnah was also written in a very short form. And the Talmud expanded, the Babylonian Talmud expanded much more, the Jewish Talmud expanded much less. Then you have the commentators, and then the codifiers who took out the law from the Talmud. They derived the law from the Talmud, and from there we get the Jewish law, which is the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law. Today I want to discuss a bit about the Midrash. The Midrash, now what is the Midrash? Again, the Torah was given, the written law was given. And we know there are gaps in the written law. There are 2 kinds of gaps. One gap was in the practical aspects of the law. As we said, you want to know how to write a mezuzah. It doesn't say. So the oral law fills in the details. So some of the Midrashim are dealing with halakha, dealing with Jewish law. There's halachic Midrashim. And then the other Midrashim, which are more widely known, are Agadic, what's called Agadita, Agadic Midrashim. Agadic Midrashim are Midrashim which deal with stories in the Torah. Let me give you an example. There are many stories in the Torah where the main content is missing. For example, Abraham. How old was Abraham, when the Torah starts mentioning him? How old was he already? 70. Rashi says he was 70. Before 70, we have no records of Abraham. It just says he was born, and then all of a sudden he's 70 years old. So what happened to the first 70 years of his life? Anything important? So the Midrash fills in details, fills in the blanks of the historical account. That's one kind of Midrash, which is the Agadic Midrash, the stories of the Midrash. So Midrash, one of the purposes of the Midrash is to fill in the background information of the historical account, which is missing. For another example, Moses. The first time we see Moses as a baby, all of a sudden when we see him again, he comes out of the palace and he kills the Egyptian and he separates the Jews. And then when you see him again, right, he's the burning bush. He runs away and he's to Jethro, and then he's burning bush. How many years later was it? He was 80 years old, the Midrash says. Because he died at 120, it says, the Torah says, and he's in the desert for 40 years. So you work it out, the math. He was 80 years old when he went back to Egypt to take the Jews out. 79, because it took him a year to get them out. But what happened for those missing years? It's about 60 years odd were missing from his life. What happens to them? So the Midrash would fill in the details. So the Midrash there's two kinds of details missing from the Torah. There are laws which are given in a very cryptic way, and the main details are missing. So the Midrash would fill in the details, or the oral law would fill in the details. The Midrash is part of the oral law. And then there are stories in the Torah which are missing details as well. For example, Dinah was raped by Shechem. Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. Jacob's daughter was raped. Did she get pregnant? Did she get pregnant? Did she have a child? What happened to the child? Midrash fills in the details. She had a child, she had a girl. The girl was sent down to Egypt, and the girl marries Joseph. That's the Midrash. Beautiful ending over there. So the Midrash fills in all the details over here in terms of what happened, what's going on, what's missing from the story, what's missing from the accounts. There's two kinds of Midrashim. One of my favorite halachic Midrashim, it's a beautiful Midrash, which tells us the origins of a custom which is so widespread today, people don't even know they're doing it. You go to a party, people raise their cups and they say L'chaim. Right? To life. Why do we say L'chaim? So Midrash says a beautiful idea. This is the Midrash Tanchuma, which is a halachic Midrash. And the Midrash Tanchuma says a beautiful idea. And it says, and this a lot of background over here, information. It says that in those days, in Jewish law, there's capital punishment. There are 4 kinds of capital punishment in Jewish law. Sekila, serefa, hereg, henek. Sekila is stoning, which doesn't mean that you take stones and throw. It means that the guy falls upside down from 2 stories up. They throw him down leg first, and bang, and he goes. If he's still alive, then they throw stones at him. That's stoning. Serefa is burning. What does that mean? Not burning with fire, but burning with lead, hot lead. They pour it down his throat. Chereg is with a sword, execution with a sword, and chereg is strangulation, but with a silken cord pulled around the neck, not with a hanging by the noose. So those are the 4 different kinds of death penalties in Jewish law. However, the Rabbi Akiva says that this was very rarely carried out, because in Jewish law, the laws of testimony are so complicated. You need 2 witnesses who are trustworthy, not related to each other, who know the truth and the whole truth. Because you can ask them questions about the whole detail, every detail. They have to know exactly every single detail. What color was the shoelace? I don't know. I didn't pay attention. It was dark. I couldn't see it. Okay. Your testimony is not acceptable. You have to know everything. You have to remember all the details. And the 2 witnesses contradict even on the smallest details. They could be disqualified. You have to have 2 people who serve, eyewitnesses. DNA is not enough. Circumstantial evidence is not enough to kill someone. So it's very rare. Plus, these 2 witnesses must have warned the person. For example, the guy's got a gun and he's going to shoot someone. The 2 witnesses say, hey, don't do that. If you do that, there's a death penalty. He says, I know and I don't care. And then he does it, then there's a death penalty. But if he wasn't warned in Jewish law by 2 witnesses, there's no death penalty. So which situation? Can you imagine? The guy commits adultery and he's caught in the act. They have to warn him. The witnesses have to warn him, hey, don't do that, otherwise you're going to get capital punishment. Where do you find cases like that? You don't find these cases. So in Jewish law, there is capital punishment. It's on the books. But it was very rarely carried out. The Talmud says if a court carried out capital punishment once in 70 years, it was considered a bloody court. They had blood on their hands. So obviously it was on the books. It was very rarely carried out. We find in the desert, Moses puts 2 people to death in 40 years. And that was... Yeah, and he didn't want to do it on his own bat. He had to ask God, what's the verdict? So we see how careful they were. They didn't just come along and punish people and kill people. It wasn't just like that. It was capital punishment, just like New Jersey is capital punishment on the books. And it's never been carried out. So the Jewish law is very similar. It's on the books, it's a deterrent, but you know what? We never do it because we're not sure 100%. You have to be 100% sure. Plus, there's an interesting law, which is there were 71 members on the Supreme Court. Imagine a Supreme Court made of 71 rabbis. I mean, it's hard to imagine. 71 rabbis on the court, and an interesting case. If everyone on that court says he's guilty, he's innocent. It's a wild law. Because if everyone is in agreement that he's guilty, there must be something wrong. There's no such thing as everyone agreeing, especially 71 rabbis agreeing. There's no such case. If they all agree, it must be something wrong with the case. If it's such a cut and dry case, we're missing something. There's no such thing as a 100% cut and dry case. There must be at least one opposing opinion. Not only that, but there has to be a majority of 2, which means the majority of 3, because there's 71 judges. So in Jewish law, you can't just, capital punishment is not just by a majority of 1, the majority of 3 to pass the capital punishment. So those are the cases, and there were no lawyers in Jewish courts. the judges were the cross-examiners. And this way the people didn't learn how to say lies. The lawyers would, today, the lawyers tell the person, plead like this, you'll get this, you plead like this, you'll get that. We'll find Pirkei Avot says not to be like a lawyer. And the judges themselves got to know not to teach a person how to lie. What does that mean? Let me give you a little example. That's in the first chapter of Pirkei Avot. A mother asked her son, my son, I find the cake is missing, half the cake is missing. Did you do it? Son says, no, I didn't do it. It wasn't me, it was someone else, I didn't do it. The mother says, were you so hungry last night that you ate half the cake? He says, yeah, well, Mommy, I was hungry. So the way the question is phrased can make someone tell a lie or can induce someone to admit. So the Mishnah says the people on the Beit Din have to know how to phrase the questions to get an admission out of the person without making them tell lies. So if you ask someone a question point blank, and good lawyers do this, they know how to go around, run around the bush till the guy doesn't know what we're after, and they make him ask a little innocuous question and the truth comes out. The best lawyers know how to do that. But just ask them directly, did you do it or no? They'll say no. So we're teaching them how to lie. So the Pirkei Avot says don't teach the judges, number one, they shouldn't act like lawyers, and they shouldn't teach a person how to lie. So let's go back. So there's a beautiful case. Okay, so there's capital punishment. But the Talmud says an interesting thing. This is thousands of years ago in Jewish law. The Talmud says, the Torah says to kill a person, the Torah does not say to torture them. These death penalties are pretty painful. So how can you kill someone without torturing them? So the Talmud says you have to get them inebriated before you kill them. Whereas the convict who's being killed has to be drunk before you kill him. Because the Torah says to kill him, doesn't say to torture him, doesn't say to cause him pain and agony. Interesting law. It's just thousands of years old. Which system has this where the convict who's being sentenced to death shouldn't feel pain? We don't want him to feel pain. The Torah says to kill him, doesn't say to torture him. So what happened was, at the verdict, they were bringing in a glass of wine. Must be a pretty big glass of wine, very strong wine. And they would ask the rabbis on the court, Savri Mananan, what is the verdict, rabbis? And then the chief rabbi would say, L'chaim, in which case to life, in which case the rabbi would drink the wine. Or would say Lamita, which is to death, in which case to give the convict the wine to drink before the sentence was carried out. So that is the source, the Midrash says, of L'chaim. Now we know the source of L'chaim. Why do we say L'chaim? Because cups of wine have a dual expression. They can be for life or they can be for death. We see a cup of wine, we say L'chaim, L'chaim, L'chaim. It's for life. This cup of wine is for life. It's not for death. It shouldn't be linked to death at all. So we find beautiful midrashim which explain halakha, which explain Jewish law, and beautiful midrashim which explain history, historical accounts. Abraham was 3 years old, and whatever happened, and his father Terach had a store full of idols. There's a beautiful midrash. And Abraham was told by his father, look after the store. He grew up and he looked after the store. I'm going away on vacation. Abraham looks after the store, and the father comes back and he finds the shambles. All the idols were smashed except for one idol. One big idol had a hammer in his hand. He asked Abraham, he said, what happened? I left you a store full of idols. What happened to the idols? He says, Daddy, he said, what can I tell you? An old lady brought me a plate of food for the idols. And they had a fight, and the old one, the big idol, won, and he smashed the small ones. His father said, come on, Abraham. I know that these idols can't move. And you know the idols can't move. So then Daddy says, why do you worship them? So that's what Midrash says about little kiddie Abraham. This is Abraham at a young age. So Midrash is filling in the blanks of Abraham Avinu, his life. So without this Midrashim, we'd be a lot poorer. Because this gives us some oral ideas. This was all oral tradition, which was passed down from word of mouth, from generation to generation, to fill in the blanks in the Bible. What happened over here, what happened over there. The Torah doesn't give us the details. What happened to these ages, the Torah doesn't give us the details. Okay, so there's two kinds of midrashim. There's the halachic midrash, and there's an agadic midrash. Just like there's two parts of the Talmud. There's the Talmud which deals with the law, and the Talmud deals with stories. There are many stories in the Talmud. And there's a famous Rambam, Maimonides. There's a chapter of Talmud which is called Chelik, Perek Chelik. And we say this in our prayers every day. Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelik le'olam haba. Every single Jew has a portion in the world to come. And the trouble is, it doesn't say how big the portion is going to be. We all have a portion in the world to come, But there's a portion, there's a portion. There's a small portion, there's a big portion. It doesn't say everyone has a portion. We all have portions, but how big is the portion? That depends on us. That's dependent on us. So it's the 10th chapter of Sanhedrin. The 10th chapter of Tractate Sanhedrin deals with a portion of the Jews of the world to come. And over there, some beautiful stories. So the Rambam, Maimonides, writes a commentary on the Mishnah. And on this particular chapter, he has a preface which deals with the stories of the Talmud and the Agadah and the Midrash. These stories, some of these stories are very tall stories. Do you take them literally? Let me give you a very tall story Midrash. There's a Midrash about Og Melech HaBashan. Who was Og Melech HaBashan? Who was Og Melech HaBashan? He was a king of Bashan, which was on the east side of the Jordan. Og Melech HaBashan. He was the king of Bashan. So the Midrash says he was a giant. He was a massive giant, and he was alive at the time of the flood, time of Noah, and he escaped the flood by clinging onto Noah's Ark. And then in the time of Moses, he's the king, and he was also the guy who ran to Abraham. The Bible tells us there was a man ran to Abraham, told him Lot was taken captive. Who was that man? So the Midrash says that was Og Melech HaBashan before he became the king of Bashan. And eventually becomes a king. We see him in the Torah again. So Midrash fills in the details. And he was a giant. And then the Midrash says Moses tried to kill him. Moses was 18 feet tall, and when he jumped, he only reached the ankles of Og Melech HaBashan. This seems to be right out of Gulliver's Travels, the story. In fact, or Gulliver's Travels came from this story. But how do we understand this Midrash? It's a very far-fetched, a very tall story. So here we have a beautiful Rambam. And the Rambam tells us, obviously, the Rambam had this question: how do you learn these Midrashim? Some of these Midrashim are very far-fetched, very tall stories. How do you learn the Midrashim? The Rambam tells us there are three groups of people and three different ways of learning Midrash. The first one, he says, is a very large group of people. We're talking about 1150 CE. Rambam was born 1135. So 1150, 1160s, in the 1100s. The Rambam says the first group of people is very large group. And what do? He says they respect the rabbis of old tremendously. This group of people respects the rabbis tremendously, and they take whatever they learn from these rabbis literally, and they believe it 100%. Because they take all these midrashim, they're from the rabbis, we respect the rabbis, we accept all these midrashim literally, and they're 100% true. Okay? Is that good or bad? Seems good, right? Seems fantastic, right? The Rambam says, wrong. It's very bad. He says, why? Because this group of people, instead of raising the rabbis in the eyes of others, is lowering the rabbis in the eyes of others. Instead of making the Torah of God wondrous and full of wisdom, they're making it into a mockery. Because other people who hear these stories will say, you really believe this happened? Say, yes, it says, the Midrash, the rabbi said this really happened. Let's say you're a fool. And let's say the Torah is foolish as well. So Rambam says, this group of people make the Torah into a mockery for the nations. And instead of the people of the world saying, as we say in Deuteronomy chapter 4, people will say that this is a wise and understanding nation, this great nation. People will say the opposite. These are a foolish nation. They have these stories and they don't make sense, and they believe them and take them literally. So that's the first group, and he says, and this group bring disgrace on the Torah and bring disgrace on the rabbis. Taking it literally, taking the Midrashim, these told stories literally, brings disgrace on the rabbis. The second group, he said, and they're also a large group, also takes this literally. And also, they take everything literally. However, since they take it literally, they say these rabbis don't know what they're talking about, and they, instead of respecting the rabbis, they denigrate the rabbis. So both groups take it literally, take these midrashim literally. One group takes it literally and brings disgrace to the Torah, but they respect the rabbis. At least they respect the rabbis. But they're causing disrespect by other people learning these things and saying, wow, these guys said this, they don't know what they're talking about. The second group, they don't respect the rabbis, but they take everything literally. And therefore they don't respect the rabbis. And they denigrate the rabbis. He said this is worse than the first group, because they're denigrating the rabbis. And then he says, the third group, he says, let me read you to his language, such a beautiful language. He says, by the life of God, he says, very few people. Can't even call them a group. So what happens with them? He says they realize when the rabbis said stories, they're parables. They're mishalim. Today we know mashal and nimshal. A mashal, a parable, has to have a deeper meaning. So when you see some stories in the Midrash which are not rational and cannot be understood rationally, Rambam says, understand this is a proverb, it's a riddle. And in those days, the wise people used to speak in riddles. In fact, there's a beautiful Midrash. The Midrash says that King Solomon was the wisest of the wise. And in fact, in his book of parables, he starts off by talking about who can understand riddles. His book of parables is all riddles. You can't take it literally, they're all riddles. And it was very common in those days to have riddles. The Midrash says, the Queen of Sheba, heard of her? The Queen of Sheba went to visit King Solomon. In fact, Haile Selassie, right? Former king of Ethiopia, before they bumped him off, or he died, or whatever. He claimed to be one of their descendants of the Queen of Sheba, from Shlomo. Obviously, he called himself the Lion of Judah, but very doubtful that King Solomon would marry her, obviously. But the Midrash says she asked him some riddles. So we see it was very common to find a wisdom to explain to me this riddle, explain to me this story. And where else do we see this? In the Bible they say explicitly, Samson marries a Philistine woman, and in the wedding feast, it was customary, he asked them riddles. And he said, if you can answer me riddles, I'll give you a tremendous amount of money. Because instead of buying a lottery ticket, they would ask people the riddles, and if you can answer the riddle, you get money. Not just by chance. It was wisdom, not chance. Riddles. So we see riddles were very common in those days, and the wisest of the wise spoke riddles to each other. This way only they would understand. They had like a code words. They would understand the riddle. You could be saying a riddle in front of everyone. Most people take it literally and say, what is he talking about? Or I believe it, I don't believe it. Take it literally. What the rabbi was really saying was something much deeper. And today we know, for example, a lot of rabbis today, in their speech on Shabbat, would use a story to illustrate something. But the main thing is not the story. The main thing is the point behind the story. So that's a mashal. The story is called a mashal. It's called a parable. There's a very famous rabbi called the Magid ben Dubna. You get this book in English. It's called the Dubna Magid and his Parables. He lived about 200 years ago. And he wandered around, wandering preacher, and he has beautiful books of parables where he has stories, but each of these stories are full of wisdom. Because you take the it's like Aesop's fables. There's a beautiful fable which Aesop got from Rabbi Akiva. The story is that there's a time of the Romans, and the Romans prohibited Jews to learn Torah. And they prohibited the rabbis to have classes like this. And no classes, no public classes. And Rabbi Akiva continued learning Torah. And Rabbi Akiva had a nephew called Pappus, who was very assimilated. And Pappus met Rabbi Akiva one day, and he said, Rabbi, he says, my uncle, he says, I hear you're teaching Torah in public. They're going to catch you one day. It's not worth it. And true enough, they catch Rabbi Akiva and they put him in jail. Who does he meet in jail? He meets his nephew Pappus, also in jail. He says, why are you here? He says, because I'm teaching Torah. I was teaching Torah in public. He says, woe to me, Pappus, who's here because of cheating the taxes. Praise the you, Rabbi Akiva, who's here because you're teaching Torah. But anyway, Rabbi Akiva told Pappus an interesting parable. He says the fox and the fish were talking to each other. So the fox was on the dry bank, and the fish was in the river. But the fish was very worried. The fish was running around in the river. Fish was swimming around the river, agitated. So the fox says, "Fish, what's going on? Why are you so agitated?" He says, "What can I tell you, dear fox?" He says, "These men, they put these traps all over the river. They want to catch me. So I don't know what to do." So the fox says to the fish, he says, "Why don't you come on the dry land with me? And we'll live together. You'll escape from all their troubles in the water." So the fish told the fox, he says, "Are you the smartest of the animals? You're the dumbest of all the animals. If in a place where I live, which is keeping me alive, the sustenance of the water is keeping me alive, I'm in danger, how much more so in a place where I don't live I'm going to be in danger?" So what's the parable? Parable is, Rabbi Akiva is telling Pappus, he says, if when we're learning Torah we're in danger, how much more so we're going to be in danger when we're not learning Torah? And we see this today. The assimilation rates are much worse than all the Holocausts. Assimilation. Who Who would have thought? Holocaust was a third of the Jewish people. Assimilation rates are 50%. So we're going through this. So if when we're learning Torah we're in danger, how much more so when we're not learning Torah we're going to be in danger? The Torah is keeping us alive as Jews. Without the Torah there wouldn't be any Judaism. So you have to remember that. That is very, very important. So that was his parable. When we just read the story, it's a beautiful story. The fox and the fish, what's he talking about? So that's the bottom line. That's what Rambam says is the Midrashim are trying to illustrate something deeper. It's very important not to take things literally and to understand there's a deeper message as well. But not only that, not only the Midrash, but also, interestingly, in the Torah itself. The Torah itself uses language which should not be taken literally. What do I mean by that? I mean that, and this is also a very interesting Rambam, when the Torah discusses God, right? Anyone say yes? Are they to be taken literally? Obviously not. We believe that God has got no face, no form, and no shape. So they can't be taken literally. So we see that even in the Torah, certain things you cannot take literally. And if you do take it literally, it's a disbeliever. It's an apikoros. Person is banned from the community for taking these things literally. And so the Rambam said this in the Middle Ages. Rambam said this in the 1100s. He said that God has no shape and no form. And what happened was, one of the famous French rabbis, the Ravad, argued with him. And he says, how can that be? The Torah explicitly says. So you see, when the Rambam was talking against the literalists, he wasn't just talking against the literalists amongst the Midrash, learning Midrash, he was also talking against the literalists who were learning the Torah as well. In fact, the Gemara asked this question in Sanhedrin. The Gemara says, how can the Torah say these things? God is a finger, God is a hand. So the answer to the Talmud says, a beautiful answer. The Talmud says, Dibra Torah kelashon bnei adam. The Torah spoke in the language of man. Because how are you going to explain to human beings, especially on their level, where they were 3,300 or 3,400 years ago, about God having no shape and no form and no this? How are they going to understand anything? So the Torah had to relate it in a certain sense where people could understand. And the beauty of the Torah is that even a child can understand it. Think about an advanced textbook on what's the most complicated subject? Quantum physics. You have a most advanced textbook on quantum physics. Because the truth is, if you read the first 2 chapters of the Torah, it's quantum mechanics. How did God create the world? It's cosmology. It's advanced cosmology. Because it's talking about creation. And a child can read it and understand. A child can read it and understand it in a certain way. Obviously, it's not to be taken literally either. We know it's not to be taken literally. But how do we know the first 2 chapters not to be taken literally? Because the Torah Talmud says that that's the secret of the Torah. There's 2 secrets of the Torah which we're going to come to when we talk about the Kabbalah. And what is the Kabbalah? What is the Kabbalah? The answer is the Kabbalah is 2 secrets. The secrets of Maaseh Bereshit, the secrets of creation, and the secrets of Maaseh Merkabah, and the secrets of the chariot of God, which is in the vision of Ezekiel. 2 basic secrets, which is what the Kabbalah discusses in great detail, plus other things as well. So if the Torah is to be taken literally, the creation of the world is taken literally, why is there a big secret? Where's the secret? There it is, it's explicit. God said, let there be this, and it happened. God said, let there be that, and it happened. So what's the secret? The answer is something deeper going on, which is not revealed. There's the text and what's behind the text. And there's a lot of things behind the text. And the Kabbalah discusses every single dot of the text. If there's an extra dot or an extra dash, the Kabbalah discusses it. Because it has to understand deeply what's going on behind the text. So that's how to understand Midrash. So let's recap. There are 3 ways of understanding Midrash. The first way is take it literally and accept it. The rabbis were great, that's what they said. But the trouble is that brings the Torah into disrepute, brings the rabbis into disrepute, because people say, what a foolish people, what kind of stories they have, and they believe them. The second way is also to accept them literally, and because of that, deny the worthiness of the Torah, deny the worthiness of the rabbis. So these guys don't know what they're talking about. That's the worst way. And the third way, he says, is very few and far between. He's talking about his time, is to understand that these are messages which the rabbis gave in parable form, in deep form, in riddled form, for the wise to understand, to search out the meaning. And that's today how we learn Midrash. Most yeshivas today skip the Midrashim. Why do they skip the Midrashim? They'll tell you, we don't understand them. They're deep. We don't understand it. There's stories in the Talmud which are very hard to understand. What's going on with it? Let me give you a little story. A woman came to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who was the author of the Mishnah, of the editor of the Mishnah. And she saw him and she saw his face. She says, wow, you're so handsome, you're so good looking, you're so well fed. Which was unusual in those days. It was Roman persecution. Most people looked haggard and pale and dehydrated and malnourished. Yeah, it's actually so great. So there are 2 professions which were doing well in Israel at that time. One of them was a person who raises pigs, because the Romans wanted a lot of pig. And the other one was a person who lends with interest. So she said, you must be, either you raise pigs, or you must be lending money with interest. He says, no, neither, he says. They're both forbidden in Jewish law. Not allowed to raise pigs. There's a law in Jewish law saying that a Jew is not allowed to, this is rabbinical law, a Jew is not allowed to engage in non-kosher food production, or non-kosher food distribution, or non-kosher selling food at all. So obviously a Jew is not allowed to raise pigs. So he says not allowed. Plus the Torah says you're not allowed to lend money with interest. So I didn't do that either. But what do? Every day I walk from my house to the house of learning, and there are 24 bathrooms in between, and I stop in each one of them. What kind of story is that? What does he mean by that? So the Vilna Gaon says a beautiful idea, and just shows how deep these sayings are. He says, just like there's a bathroom for the body, there's a bathroom for the mind. What does that mean? There's waste which comes out of the body, excrement. There should be waste which should come out of the mind. All the garbage a person went in. We see things, we hear things, it's junk. A person's got to purify their mind, we've got to throw out the waste. So that's what he's referring to. The bathroom is between his house and the Beit Midrash. The house of learning, he'll purify his mind. That's the bathroom he's talking about, the spiritual bathroom. He's purifying his mind 24 times before he would learn Torah, and that's why he looks so healthy. Because most people have problems in the head. See people walking around, they have problems in the head. Purify the mind, the person will look healthy. The mind is a lot of barriers, a lot of things are psychosomatic. So a person purifies the mind. He was purifying his mind 24 times between walking from his house. That's the Vilna Gaon's explanation. So obviously it's a midrash, it's an agadata, it's a story. How do we understand the story? So not take these stories, a person's got to be very careful not take these stories literally, because they can cause great damage. Not even to them, sometimes it causes damage to the person himself. What a silly story, how can it be? These guys don't know what they're talking about. Or it can cause damage to their children. The children will grow up and say, look, they taught me these stories. So we've got to be very, very careful to tell the children when they say these stories, when they're learning these stories, these are very deep. These stories are very deep. Don't take them literally. They're very, very deep, and we have to understand them very carefully. One day we'll understand them. There's explanations to them. So it's very important when learning Midrash to understand that they're very deep, and we have to understand what these Midrashim are talking about. So that's the Midrash. Let's just go on and discuss briefly the Zohar. Now, it's interesting because the whole oral law we have today, the oral law which we have today, are from students of Rabbi Akiva. One man, it's amazing. Rabbi Akiva's father was a convert to Judaism, Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef. He himself was a shepherd who didn't even know how to read and write at the age of 40. Akiva. This is a great story. If you want to know more about his life, there's a book called Akiva by Marcus Lehman. It's a children's book. It's I highly recommend it because all the sources are from the Talmud. It's Akiva by Marcus Lehman, and it's printed by Feldheim Books. You can get it into any Jewish bookstore. Feldheim Books. It's a famous Jewish publisher. It's a good book. Akiva tells you his life story. And what happens was, he starts working for a very wealthy individual whose name was Kalbas Habua, which means satisfied dog. He was nicknamed Satisfied Dog. Why? Because it says he was very hospitable. If you went into his house hungry, he would leave like a satisfied dog. You ever seen a satisfied dog? They puff and they pant. They overeat. They're satisfied dogs. It says you leave his house after being a guest in his house, he's stuffed. He stuffed a person. He's so hospitable, he stuffed the person. So they nicknamed him the Satisfied Dog. Not a nickname. But it was a nickname which is a worthy nickname. It wasn't to be a derogatory nickname. And he only had one daughter. Very wealthy individual, only one daughter. His daughter's name is Rachel. And he has this new shepherd, Akiva. He's 40 years old. Must be very handsome, must be very smart. This girl could see the genius in this shepherd. The shepherd knew nothing. But she could see this guy is unusual. She could see the potential of the man. And she fell in love with him, and he fell in love with her. And the father said, if you marry this shepherd, I'm going to disinherit you. Because you're my only daughter. I want you to marry someone worthy, not that shepherd. He's an ignoramus, the guy. It's not that I care about his profession, but he's an ignoramus. It bothers me. You're going to marry an ignoramus. I raised you. I taught you everything. I educated you. You're going to marry this idiot over here. So she told Akiva, she says, I'll only marry you if you go and learn. If you go and learn, I'll marry you. Because I want to marry someone who's knowledgeable, knows things. So he agreed. Before he agreed, it says he sat by the banks of a river, by the stream, in the property. He was sitting by the stream. And he's thinking to himself, can I go and study? How can I study? I'm 40 years old. And he sees in the stream, a drop of water had made a hole in the rock over thousands of years. drop, drop, drop. He's looking down, drop, drop, drop. He sees over there a hole in the rock. He says, wow, he says, if water, drip of water can make a hole in a rock, the Torah can make a hole in my head, can go through. So he agreed with her, and he got married to her. The father disinherited him. They go, and he's learning, she sends him away. She's supporting the family. Living in poverty, says they lived in straw. We can't imagine how they live. And she would send him every day to go and learn. Now he had a problem going to find a rabbi. Because every house of learning he went to, the first question is, how old are you? He's 40. And the second question is, what do you know? I don't know. So until he found a rabbi called Nachum Ish Gamzu. Nachum Ish Gamzu's favorite saying was, Gamzu l'tova. Whatever it is, for the best. Everything is for the best. We have to have that positive spin on life. Everything that happens for the best, God has a plan. We tried our best, God has a plan. So how old are you, Rabbi Akiva? Wasn't a rabbi at that time. 40. Gamzu l'tova. Even that's for the best. He says, what do you know, Akiva? She said, I don't even know how to bet. He says, Gamzu l'tova. And eventually what happened was, Akiva studied, says 24 years straight. 24 years he studied, and he ended up with 24,000 students. Akiva became a genius, he became the chief rabbi. Not only that, but we have, normally when a person learns the Torah at an early age, they don't pay attention to small details. You learn the Aleph Bet at a very early age, you don't pay attention to all the shapes of the Aleph and the Bet. Rabbi Akiva is learning at the age of 40. So he asked his rabbi, he says, why is the Aleph shaped like that? Why is it shaped like that? It's got a slant over here, and it's got a curve over here, and a curve over there. Why is it shaped like that? So no one ever thought of those questions. So he invented this new ideas of why it's shaped like that. So there's a book called Otiyot de Rabbi Akiva, the letters of Rabbi Akiva. So there's a book which he wrote about today we have a book in English, published by Art Scroll on the Jewish alphabet. Tells you the significance of each of the letters. That's number one. Number two, we find in the Torah, there are crowns on letters. There are little crowns, little sticks of ink written on top of little lines on the letters. So people grew up with it and they didn't ask questions. Rabbi Akiva asked questions. How come these letters have crowns? He learned thousands of laws from these crowns. And the third thing, the Torah uses unnecessary language sometimes. Sometimes unnecessary words. So people who learn Torah from a very early age, they don't pay attention because I know it by heart, I learned it many times before. Don't pay attention. Rabbi Akiva, just starting at the age of 40, every single word had to have a meaning. So he learned out every meaning of every single word. So he's very unique, very bright, very big genius. And the whole Torah we have today, the oral law which we have, which includes the Mishnah, the Midrash, and the Zohar, all came from his students. So through his students, all the laws we have, all the Midrashim we have, everything comes from his students. So that's very, very important. He was the conduit to all these laws. Imagine the guy who started at the age of 40, coming from nowhere. I compare it to a racehorse, right? The dark horse who wins the race, coming from nowhere, out of the blue, right? So here are the favorites. You have people running and people learning from all their lives. Whereas from nowhere, this guy comes at the age of 40. They thought he was the biggest idiot. He's sitting over there. He didn't talk. For 12 years, he didn't even open his mouth. Just listening and listening. The Talmud said his mind was like a store. In those days, they didn't have filing cabinets. But the comparison to a filing cabinet was a store. What do you mean by a store? Because the store had to be everything ordered. So this was on a certain shelf, this one on a certain shelf. His mind, when he got a piece of information, he filed it away. He knew exactly where it was. He knew, like a hard drive today. Computer's hard drive. So he knew exactly how to do it. He knew exactly where everything was. He could file it all away. So from him comes all these different bits of information. I just want to finish off with a little story, and then next week we'll go into what the Kabbalah is and how it fits into the picture, and then the week after we'll start discussing in depth Pirkei Avot. But finish off the story. The Talmud says, Arba'a nichnesu lepardes. 4 people entered the pardes. Entered literally the orchard. What is this orchard? So rabbis say pardes stands for 4 different things. The pei stands for pshat, which is a simple meaning of the text. The reish stands for remez, which is a hint of the text. The dalet stands for drash, which is the deeper meaning of the text. And the samach stands for sod, which are the secrets of the text. There's 4 different levels of learning Torah. The simple literal meaning, the hints, the deeper meaning, and the secrets of the Torah, Kabbalah. 4 rabbis entered this pardes, which means 4 rabbis learned all these 4 different parts of the Torah. What happened? One rabbi went crazy. Ben Zomad says went crazy. Ben Zomad died. Now Ben Zomad went crazy. Ben Azai died. He lost his appetite for anything physical, which was one of the problems with meditation. A person's got to know how to come back and want to come back. Or the person just goes crazy. That's it. There are many potential prophets in lunatic asylums. Elisha ben Abuya became an Apikoros. One of the rabbis denied God. He saw too many powers in the world. Couldn't figure out there's one power. How's one power overruling everything? And the only one who came out sane, it says, was Rabbi Akiva. He had a very strong mind, very unique talents of analogy and learning and analyzing and filing things away. He was very unique, and that's really the oral law today. The conduit is Rabbi Akiva. Just finish off with the story. The Torah says, it's a midrash, beautiful midrash. It's a Gemara Menachot. Gemara says that Moses goes up to heaven and he sees God writing a Sefer Torah. Okay, God has a Sefer Torah as well. And he sees God putting crowns on the Torah. Okay, it's parable, something which you have to learn from. It has a very deep meaning over here. God is putting crowns on the Torah. So Moses says, what are these crowns for? Apparently he didn't know what the crowns were for. So God says, eventually there's going to be a rabbi who's going to learn laws from me, these crowns. He says, wow, I want to see this rabbi. He says, okay, go behind me. First story of time travel, Midrash says. Go behind me, he goes behind God. He lands up in the class of Rabbi Akiva. And in those days the classes were, the most advanced students were in the front. And the people just joined in, would come in from the back and sit down. And every year, advancing, the students would advance. And the highest students would go into the court. They'd be part of the judges. But they rose. It says Moses ended up in the 8th row, which is very strange. Moses ends up in the 8th row. And then he's listening to the class, doesn't know what's going on. What's going on? What is he talking about? He didn't understand Rabbi Akiva's class. Apparently there were many thousands of laws embedded in the Torah which Moses didn't even know. Because of these crowns, he didn't know how to learn these laws from the crowns. So he's listening, can't understand. Until finally someone asked the question, he says, Rabbi, he says, where do you know this from? He says, Halacha la Moshe me Sinai. We learned it from Moses from Sinai. And Moses, phew, at least something is from me, So it's a beautiful story. And then Moses goes back and he says, God, he says, such a genius, why don't you give the Torah through him? Why are you giving the Torah through me? That's Moses' question. God says, don't ask questions. I have my calculations. So that's a beautiful midrash. We see that Rabbi Akiva knew more even. So Rabbi Akiva is a genius, and we're fortunate to have a person like that. And from him, he's the conduit for the oral law. Okay, we'll stop here. Next week we'll continue with the Zohar and the Kabbalah and where that came from. How does that fit into the bigger picture? And then we'll continue next week, the week after that, with Pirkei Avot. Okay, stop here.